Hi, welcome to this episode of The Daily. My name is Brendan Malone. Well, last week in France, we saw yet another horrific terrorist attack. It follows hot on the heels of yet another horrific terrorist attack that took place in Iraq, and that one followed hot on the heels of, you get the gist of where I'm going with this. I think it's pretty safe to say now that the West is at war. It has been for some time, we just haven't realised it or have been unwilling to admit that fact. The West is at war with radical Islam. Radical Islam is totally incompatible to the fundamental principles that underpin Western democracy and Western society. And the problem is, though, that I don't know if we understand just how serious this battle actually is and just how serious our commitment to winning this struggle has to be. The reason I say that is because the standard response now has become some sort of hashtag, change your Facebook profile, and maybe we'll share a video of some guy singing John Lennon's Imagine song. Nice little ditty, but a terrible philosophy to try and live any sort of just, stable civil order by. Perhaps in a future episode I might dissect line by line what is wrong with John Lennon's Imagine if you're trying to use it as an ideology to build a society on. But the point is that hashtags and happy feels are not going to save the West. You don't win something by sitting there and doing nothing. Winning implies proactive action. It implies striving. It implies fighting, competing for that prize. And at the moment, that's really what we're not doing in the West. We seem to have this rather jaundiced and very arrogant view of history, that seems to think if we just sort of sit here and sing Kumbaya, then history will eventually just sort of flush out all the bad guys and we'll sort of come out on the right side of this. That's not how human history works. There are plenty of examples throughout human history where once great civilizations no longer exist. Okay, this idea that just because you're dominant now, you will always be dominant is simply a very bizarre form of complacency that leaves us very vulnerable here. The reality is as well that we need to begin to have a dialogue and a discussion about what it means to be the West. And that's a big problem for us. I think if you talk to most people, they could probably enunciate for you what they think some of the core or fundamental values of the West are. But things would break down if you asked them two other very important questions, such as, where do those values actually come from and why should they be considered preeminent and important, above other values that, say, people from radical Islam want to impose on the West? And secondly, what do these values actually mean when you start having a conversation about moral relativism, which pervades much of the West now, or you want to start having a conversation about that particular brand of multiculturalism which tries to say that there are no real differences in value or worth between different cultures. They're just different. And when you start having those conversations, asking those questions, things begin to break down for us. It's not simply that we don't have the tools in the toolbox. It's basically, I think, in the West, we've lost sight of the toolbox. And we've lost sight of our heritage, where we've come from. Yes, I am talking here about our Christian heritage. These fundamental ideas about human rights don't suddenly pop up out of nowhere just 100 years ago or a couple of 100 years ago. These are things that have their basis in a fundamental trajectory of thought which has developed throughout the West and is nurtured and grows in profound ways, profound leaps and bounds, because of the Christianity which underpins the growth, development and the establishment of what we call the West today, the Judeo-Christian paradigm which underpins who we are. The problem is, though, we've lost sight of that, a lot of that stuff, and we now seem to have this idea if we just sit here and sing happy songs, then maybe there's going to be a good outcome at the end of this. Maybe they'll go away and leave us alone. That's not what's going on here. You are talking about ideologues, violent ideologues who are religiously motivated. And unless you know how to respond to that and make those important distinctions between what are good religious ideas and what are evil ideas, unless you know how to make that distinction between what is a good cultural practice and what is an evil or barbaric cultural practice, and then you are willing to actually put things in place in your society to uphold, nurture and protect that which is good and try and limit the scope of or the incursion of that which is evil, then you're simply not going to walk away from this. That's the cold hard reality. Like I said, you can go back and look through human history and see exactly how this plays out, how complacency overtakes a great culture, and because of that complacency and the mediocrity that it breeds, followed closely behind is an unwillingness to actually fight for something, and there's this arrogant assumption that this greatness will somehow just come through the other side unscathed. Thanks for watching. I'll see you tomorrow on The Daily.